Today we are going to be looking at Saul and Jonathan. More Jonathan than Saul, to be honest, because I find Jonathan one of the most underappreciated personalities of the Old Testament. You hear a lot about Saul because he made massive mistakes and ended badly in First King of Israel. And you hear a lot about David, right? Can't not hear about David almost. But the man who was between them often gets overlooked. And if he does get any attention, it's like he gets this sort of nod as like the best friend anybody ever had. But when you look at him, he actually provides us with a model of, for example, how to honor parents even when the parent is not honorable. How to intercede between people you love who are feuding. And of course, the friendship, the self-sacrificing loyalty to somebody who appeared to be taking his inheritance from him. So this actually spans pretty much from the first mention of him in 1 Samuel 13 all the way to his eulogy in 2 Samuel 1. So we'll be skipping around from place to place. But his first introduction, right, is in the second verse of 1 Samuel chapter 13, where we get the picture of Saul, who chose 3,000 men of Israel, kept 2,000 with himself in Michmash in the hill country of Bethel, and sent 1,000 with Jonathan to Gibeah of Benjamin. And the rest of the people he sent home, every man to his tent. So essentially, the setup is they have been oppressed by the Philistines to the point where they don't even have proper weapons, except for Saul and his son Jonathan. And yet, they are taking action. And Jonathan moves first. Verse 3, we got right out of the box, no story about it, just the announcement that he defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Gibeah. And the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear," because this is one of those moments of propaganda that is to encourage, to give heart to the oppressed Hebrew people. So that's our introduction to Jonathan. As a sub-commander under his father Saul, winning a victory. To be honest, I think Jonathan would have made a much better king than Saul. But the very next thing that we see, people are coming out of holes in the ground, basically, out of hiding to join Saul at Gilgal. And they have an appointment to meet up with Samuel to make a sacrifice to the Lord before they go off to battle. But right before that, right, verse 7, is that Saul was still at Gilgal and all the people followed him trembling. Now, if you remember back in the law about soldiery, basically, when the people were just getting ready to enter the promised land, there were certain rules that you were to follow. If a man had just married, he was to be exempted. If he had, built a house, he was exempted for a period of time. But one of the exemptions was, if he's afraid, send him home. Why? Because numbers weren't the issue. And we'll get an interesting contrast between Saul and Jonathan on that point, but here's what happens. The people are freaked out. They're like, okay, we did good, but do you think we can actually make something of this? This is kind of the atmosphere around. And so they're waiting at Gilgal, and Samuel is late. So Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from Saul. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. What tribe was he from? Benjamin. Were Benjaminites allowed to serve at the altar? No. But he figured, I've got to do something or all these people are going to go and I won't have any strength left. And as soon, I love this timing. This is so totally the Lord, right? As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and to greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, well, when I saw the people were scattering from me and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. Really? Again, pointing back to the law they had been given, they were not to seek the favor of the Lord just any old way, in any old place. There were laws about how to obey the Lord even in this. And his excuses are what? He wouldn't have had enough people to fight? And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So that's Saul. What about his son Jonathan? Chapter 14 starts out, one day Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side. You want to talk about boys will be boys. This guy and his assistant, two young men of Israel, they're like, hey, let's go over to the garrison, the Philistines garrison, just the two of us. And he didn't tell his father. Now Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah. And the people with him were about 600 men. People didn't know Jonathan had gone. Within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on the one side and a rocky crag on the other. So they're just kind of setting up the picture for you about how he's creeping up to this defended position of the Philistines. And Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. Could you get more of a contrast between him and his father? And the armor bearer says, oh, you do all that is in your heart, whatever you wish. I am with you, heart and soul. So here's these two young firebrands, and they have a plan. It's not much of a plan, by the way, by human reckoning. Here it is. We will cross over to the men and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand. Just the two of us. And so here's how it happens. Both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, oh, look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've hidden themselves. I mean, talk about condescending, right? And they hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you a thing. I mean, even in biblical language, you kind of know what they're like. And Jonathan says, yes. Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. And he had. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, and the armor bearer after him. Now, normally, right, if you're talking tactical approach to a defended place, the person on the height has the advantage. They can throw things at you. Your hands are not free. You're climbing. So I want you to picture these two young men in heavy armor climbing up, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed them after him. So he's like, whoop, chop, whoop, chop. And they just mow through these Philistines. And there was a panic in the camp, in the field. Because, this is in the first strike, right? They had killed about 20 men within a very small, I honestly, we don't have a picture of a half a furrow's length in an acre of land, but we're talking a compact area. They killed 20 guys right off in the first strike. And this causes the panic. And there's an earthquake. And it became a very great panic. Now, in some notes, it's like it was a panic from the Lord. And so, pan out, as if this were a film, to the watchtowers of Gibeah, where Saul and his people are more or less hiding. They can see the garrison from there. And they see people like spilling out of it in a panic. Dispersing here and there is how the text puts it. And Saul said to the people who were with him, "Count and see who has gone from us. Something weird is going on here. I don't think we're all here." So they count, and Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Now they just make a mention of this, but I find this kind of telling. That in contrast to Jonathan, whose faith led to a great victory, here's Saul showing himself increasingly being self-centered, self-governed, and turning away from the Lord. Because as they count, like, oh, Jonathan and his armor bearer aren't here. So he says, bring the ark of God here. Because the ark of God went with the people of Israel. And while he was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, never mind. We don't need to inquire of the Lord, basically, is what withdraw your hand means. So first off, right, he stops the priest from consulting the Lord. And he plunges into the battle that's at hand. And here's the description of the battle that's at hand. Every Philistine's sword was against his fellow, and there was very great confusion. So right now, everybody is all, yay, we're winning, and they charge into battle. But that being said, even people are coming out of hiding. People who had, here's verse 21 is an interesting point. The Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time. In any situation where there is an occupying force, there's always going to be a percentage of the population who decides it's better to just cooperate with them, basically kind of blend in. But even those had turned out to join the battle. Those who had hidden themselves in the hill countries heard that the Philistines are fleeing, and so they jump into battle. And the Lord saved Israel that day, it says. But the battle ranges far. And here's where we see another sign of Saul being completely self-centered. The men of Israel had been hard-pressed that day, so Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies." You don't have to be a military person to know that soldiers who don't eat don't really have energy to fight properly. And yet, Saul was all, "No, you won't eat until I'm avenged." kind of a leader is that? So none of the people had tasted food. And they came to the forest, there was honey on the ground. Now, this isn't just food. This is a rare sweet in a culture that did not have sugar. And yet, it says, when the people entered the forest, the honey was dropping. It was like running out of the hive. Talk about temptation. But they had heard the oath, and they were like, But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Meaning, right, his strength was renewed. He was energized. But one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. And Jonathan proves himself a sensible man. My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright? Because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now, the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. To the point where, in the evening, when they were allowed to eat, right, remember, as no one eats till evening until I've been avenged on my enemies, they are so hasty that when they sacrifice animals to eat, they're eating them with the blood. Again, reverse back to the law that was given. They were permitted to slaughter animals for meat. As long as they poured out the blood on the ground, they were not to eat the blood because the life is in the blood. And they told Saul, behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he says, you have dealt treacherously. Roll a great stone to me here. And Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, let every man bring his ox or his sheep and slaughter them here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. He's awfully concerned about this one instance of breaking the law in other people. And there's an interesting point here at verse 35, that in the midst of all this, Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar he built to the Lord. I find this interesting because how long had he been king? And this was the first altar he'd ever built to the Lord. And here again, right, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light. Let us not leave a man of them. So, yeah, you can't eat until nightfall. Now you can't sleep because we're going to go and chase Philistines all night. And the people said, do whatever seems good to you. But the priest said, let us draw near to God here. And Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But he did not answer him that day. And Saul interprets this as there being sin in the camp that stops, right, that makes the Lord not want to answer. Now let's look at his recent history. He had, in an act of complete faithlessness, made sacrifices that he was not permitted to make. And Saul had told him that the kingdom was going to be removed from him because the Lord was looking for a man after his own heart. And he had made this rash oath, hindering the victory among the people. And yet, here's what he says. Come here, all you leaders of the people, and know and see how this sin has arisen today. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. What about even though it had been in me? No. He is so convinced that he has not sinned. O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant this day? Well, if I saw my servant there, I would answer him. It's probably the thought that I would have had if I were the Lord. But they cast lots. It's kind of a yes and no method of consulting the Lord. And between the people and Saul's house was taken. Basically, it came up as yes. And then it's between Jonathan and Saul. And Jonathan was taken. So he said, tell me what you have done. I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I will die. A complete different spirit, right? He honors his father even to the point of being willing to die for unwittingly violating a stupid oath. That's the spirit we have in Jonathan. And the only reason he lives is because the people, it says, ransomed him. It's basically popular acclaim. They're like, oh, no, you don't. Shall Jonathan die who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. They have a point. Who was it that said it's not by many or by few, that the numbers don't matter, the Lord gives the victory, and went up with 2 people and started this great victory? Sorry, there's a little spider crawling on my Bible case. Anyway, and so the people ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die. Now if you want to talk about an obedient son to a flawed father, this is just the introduction. Because as we know, Saul's situation spirals downhill from here. And largely that's because enter David. If we flip forward to 1 Samuel, well, we'll take a moment in 1 Samuel 16. An interesting juxtaposition of Samuel going out to anoint a new chosen king, obviously without telling Saul. And David is chosen. Coincidentally, and I say coincidentally in air quotes because obviously this is arranged by the Lord, in an attempt to ease the suffering of Saul from a harmful spirit, somebody says, well, there's this guy, a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite. He's skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a man of good sense, and the Lord is with him. And so Saul sent for him, and in comes David. And in the beginning, Saul is as fond, or almost as fond of David as Jonathan is. Look at chapter 16, verse 21. David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And so here's David, this young man, youngest of his brothers, kind of going back and forth. He served in the court of Saul, but then he would also go home sometimes and help with the family flocks. And then comes Goliath. The Philistines are back again, and this time they bring a champion, a great big man, Goliath of Gath, who taunts them and mocks them and dares them to challenge him. And everyone's terrified of him. Except David, who says, well, bears, lions, him, not a lot of difference when the Lord is with you. We know this story. We love this story. We tell to children. But after this story is done, in chapter 18, after David finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. These are two kindred spirits. You've got the one who's like, hey, armor bearer, let's go up and taunt some Philistines and see what the Lord will do. And you've got this young man who says, hey, armor, weapons, all very nice, but I'll just stick with the slingshot I'm used to from my shepherding days. I'll go out there by myself and see what the Lord will do. Not hard to see how these two would be like, my brother. And that's really what it is. It said Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And it says that twice. Repetition in Scripture is rather important. Saul wouldn't let him go back. It's no more of this back and forth. You stay with me now. And Jonathan says, made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul, and stripped himself of the robe that was on him, gave it to David, his armor, even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Everything that marked him as what he was in society, he divests himself of it and puts it on David. And a lot of people see something symbolic in that. That he was essentially giving all he had and stepping back. Kind of like when John the Baptist, meets Jesus and he says, he must increase, I must decrease. This is kind of the thing people see here. And David is really good at what he does, to the point where the people welcome him back into the city after he's been out to battle, and the women are singing, and what you might consider a rather impolitic, unfortunate song. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s, and suddenly Saul doesn't like him as much anymore. They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom? And at this point I'm sitting here thinking, well, is Saul also among the prophets? Which was a saying that was made about him twice in his life, the beginning of his kingship and toward the end. But here is where Jonathan begins his role as intercessor. But before we get to that part, I want to jump toward the last time we see Jonathan and know exactly what he's doing, basically. 1 Samuel, chapter 23. This is when David is running from Saul. And it kind of makes me wonder, because Saul is out hunting him, and yet Jonathan knows right where to find him. 1 Samuel 23, verse 16, Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this. And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. And David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. It was the last time they ever saw each other. And what was it that Jonathan had gone out specifically to do? To encourage his kindred spirit that, yes, I know I'm not going to be the next king of Israel. That's what my father wants, but it's not going to happen. You are. And I am going to be your right-hand supporter. What kind of guy guy does that? That gives up every ambition for kingship in favor of his best friend. But that's not all we see. He risks his life for David. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 19. Now, this isn't the first time Saul tries to kill David, but everything else was a sort of an ad hoc, in the moment attempt. No planning involved. But in chapter 19, it says, Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. Now he's starting to plan. He's putting manpower into action. But Jonathan, it says, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And he told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. David's probably thinking, yeah, I know it's not the first time he's tried. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning, stay in a secret place and hide yourself, and I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I'll tell you. So he carries out his plan. David's out hiding, and Jonathan takes his father for a walk somewhere nearby. And it says, he spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? So you can see he is still embodying the obedient son. Not in that he does what his father has told him to do, which is wrong, but that he reasons with his father to talk him out of the wrong. And the situation ends in a reconciliation. Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and he swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. And at this point, Jonathan probably thought that was case closed. The matter was ended. It is not, of course, because Saul, he just figures, and that David has to tell Jonathan this, so you kind of get the feeling that Jonathan is one of those really honest to a fault guys who doesn't really see evil in other people. Because it gets to the point where David has to run. And he came before Jonathan, before he really takes off, and says, what have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? Jonathan's response is classic. Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so. Right? So he's like, no, it couldn't be. He hasn't told me anything about this. But David vowed again, saying, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. So this time, Saul decides not to tell Jonathan, knowing how he will react. David instead tells Jonathan and asks for help. So Jonathan comes up with another plan. It worked last time, right? David goes into hiding. And when Saul says, where is he? Jonathan will answer and say, well, he asked me for permission to miss this feast because he had a family thing going on. And then he's going to gauge Saul's reaction. Probably he was thinking that Saul would just be like, oh, okay. I mean, that's kind of how it turned out last time. But this time, when the new moon came, and the king sat down to eat food, Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Paul's side, but David's place was empty. Now, these feasts would take place over a couple different days, because the new moon, you're never quite sure when it's going to show up exactly. And so the first day Saul didn't say anything. He thought, well, something happened to him to make him unclean. Surely he is not clean, but he'll show up tomorrow. But then tomorrow came. David's place was still empty. And so Saul says to Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today? So Jonathan gives the answer that he had planned ahead of time, that he said to me, let me go. Our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brothers commanded me to be there. And Saul goes off. And he calls Jonathan the son of a perverse, rebellious woman. We have another phrase for that you would probably recognize better. But basically, here's Saul's argument. As long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now, hang on. What had Samuel said? That because you had not trusted in the Lord had taken the kingdom away from you and was going to give it to somebody who was more after your own heart. But here he's sitting here thinking he's going to be handing down a dynasty to his eldest son. And Jonathan just says, why should he be put to death? What has he done? And what does Saul do? He throws a spear at him. And this convinces Jonathan that his father was determined to put David to death. It's interesting, though. It wasn't being insulted, son of a... It wasn't attempted murder that makes Jonathan so angry. But what it says is he rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food on the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. It isn't even about him. He had every reason to be angry at what his father had called him and what his father had tried to do to him in a fit of temper. But his anger is for David. And so he goes through with the plan, right? Shoot the arrow. It's beyond you. Go. Send the boy back. Say goodbye to David. Send him on his way safely. And this... This good man stays a loyal son to the end. What we find in 1 Samuel 31 is that the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. And the battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded. The mention of the sons being struck down first suggests that they were seeking to protect him in the midst of a hopeless battle, that they had stayed by his side even when death was the only option. And even in death, we find him dishonored alongside his father. When the Philistines take Saul's body, right, they find him among the slain, and him and his 3 sons, and they cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers to carry the good news to the house of their idols and the people. And they fasten his body to the wall of Bethshan. They don't mention it at this point, but when the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had been saved by Saul at the very beginning of his kinghood, go to retrieve the body of Saul, it also says, and the bodies of his sons from the walls of Bethshan. Jonathan was intensely loyal. And we have his eulogy lamented, proclaimed by David in 2 Samuel 1. Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, and the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. I, for one, find it infuriating that Jonathan's modern legacy is the claim that he and David were homosexual lovers. But David calls him my brother. And in that culture, your brother was the person you relied on the most, the person who was like your own soul. We would refer to it as a kindred spirit. And his love was extraordinary. Who gives up everything for the sake of a friend? Well, that reminds me of another verse, doesn't it? Greater love has no one. And so we have this honest, loyal, principled, faithful man. Again, I would like to say one of the most underappreciated personalities of the Old Testament, who deserves better. Next week, I'm going to do a little bit of a time skip into the period of the kings, well into the period of the kings. We're going to look at, and I know he's probably not done a study on this, Jehoshaphat, who I find an interesting king. He had issues, but as kings went in that period, he was a pretty good guy. Trouble is, his account appears in both 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, so just, use your concordance and try to find his name. It's kind of a unique name, so you shouldn't have a great deal of difficulty doing it. And see what you can find out with him ahead of next week.